Maybe there was an ability that also worked on undead. This ability existed only in this world. If that was the case, staying there could put Aints in danger of being mind-controlled. He wanted to cancel the mind control as quickly as possible. Using this is a bit of a waste, Aints said. He moved his fingers. The ring he was wearing was a plain band with no jewels. Silver light revealed engravings of 3 shooting stars. This was the most powerful ring Aints owned. Is that? Albedo asked, with a curious expression. Aints flashed a triumphant smile, although his face didn't move. He said the ring's name. This is the super ultra rare item Shooting Star. It lets you use the super tier spell Wish Upon a Star 3 times without using any experience points. This was the gacha item he'd blown through his bonuses trying to get. It was so rare that only 2 Aints All-Gown members possessed 1 Aints and Yameko. Or maybe it was just proof of how much money he stupidly spent in-game. The spell it contained, Wish Upon a Star, granted random wishes. These wishes were proportional to how many experience points were spent. 10% granted 1 wish, 50% granted 5. There were quite a few possibilities. In fact, one strategy site said there were over 200. Some wishes were more likely to be granted than others. So it was a spell that came with the fear of using all of one's experience points for nothing. Also, to acquire this spell, one had to reach level 95 as a caster. Even in Yggdrasil, where leveling went quickly, experience points were important at such a high level. Players were reluctant to spend them. The wishes granted by this item's casting of Wish Upon a Star were also completely random. Useful wishes were more likely than jokey ones. So it wasn't an exaggeration to say this version of the spell was even more elite. And the most wishes it could grant at once was 10. The cast time for the super tier spell was also 0. This ring was truly one of the best cash items in the game. Using this extraordinary item, even if it was a gamble, did seem like a bit of a waste, but it wasn't worth losing Sholtia. Still, he hesitated because he knew he had other skills that would use up his surplus experience points. Aints gazed at the ring. The wish he was aiming for would cancel all status effects on his target. He had a few other candidates in mind, but that seemed the most direct way to do it. Since it also cancelled beneficial status effects, it wasn't a very popular choice in-game, and he laughed at himself now. Okay, ring, I wish. Of course, he could activate the item without shouting, but his fervent hope that out of over 200 wishes, something that fit the situation would be granted made him do it. It was like how people yelled when rolling the die to decide their bet. Yggdrasil's magic worked in this world the same way it had in the game, so Aints was sure the ring's power would cancel the mind control that Sholtia was under. At least he wanted to think that it would. Aints' biggest fear that it wouldn't cast hadn't been necessary. The ring unleashed its power in this world as well. The red flames in Aints' eye sockets shrank. What is this? It was like new information was being loaded into his brain, an unpleasant feeling. At the same time, he felt connected to something enormous, a happy feeling. Aints was assaulted by a bunch of sensations he had back when he was human. When the wave subsided, Aints realized that Wish Upon a Star in this world was something totally different from what it had been in Yggdrasil. When he learned of Enfira's talent, he had fantasized that maybe he could steal it using Wish Upon a Star. It turned out that wasn't off the mark. Wish Upon a Star had changed into a spell that could grant his wish. It did depend on how many experience points he spent, but it was a spell that could make the impossible possible. It had also transformed in this world so that by sacrificing 5 levels using 500% of his experience points, it could grant more powerful wishes. Now he was convinced he could cancel the effects of the spell Sholtia was under. He shouted victoriously, "Remove all of Sholtia's status effects." His voice echoed, and a second later, the flames in his eyes blazed larger. What? Sensing the change in their situation and how shaken Aints was, Albedo asked anxiously, "What's the matter, Lord Aints?" He couldn't manage a reply. He put together all his experience playing Yggdrasil, all the info he'd gotten off the strategy sites, and the various things he'd learned since coming to this world. And most critically, he also had the information about using Wish Upon a Star that had flooded into his head, as if to overwrite his knowledge when he'd tried to use it before. When he finally came to a conclusion, he was assailed by unbelievable levels of panic and rage. And despite the fact that he should have stabilized if he felt anything more, what he felt most of all was fear. Flustered, he shouted, "We ray withdrawing. Albedo, get over here now." "Yes, sir." Aints immediately cast a teleportation spell. In the next instant, they saw a hilly landscape. They arrived back at home, which was safe, but he still gave orders as if there was no time to lose. "Albedo, be on guard for anyone teleporting after us, sir." She drew her weapon and stood right next to Aints. Aints also braced himself, keeping both arms free so he could react flexibly to their situation. Some time passed like that, and finally Aints' tension began to ease. Albedo also returned from a fighting stance, lowering her hips to her normal posture. Shit. After the tension passed, Aints felt intense anger. Since becoming an undead, strong emotions were automatically suppressed, but every moment a new fury swept over him. Shit. Shit, shit. He kicked at the ground a few times. His uncommon strength caused a lot of dirt to get kicked up. If it hadn't rained a few days ago, he probably would have made a huge cloud of dust. But his anger still hadn't abated. "Lord Aints, please still your anger," Albedo said. Hearing the hint of fear in her voice, he finally realized he wasn't acting very much like an absolute master. His calm made a swift return. He exhaled deeply, despite not being able to breathe, to let out the flames that were burning him up. "Sorry, it seems I lost it a bit there. Please forget what you just saw. That is no problem at all. More importantly, thank you for listening to me. If you order me to forget it, Lord Aints, then I shall. But what happened? What upset you so much? If you tell me, I'll make it so it never happens again. It wasn't about you, Albedo." The ring activated, but I found out it couldn't grant the wish. From Albedo's silence, Aints realized he needed to explain further. There's only one power that the super-tier spell Wish Upon a Star can beat. Before, there had been the possibility of something unique to this world being the issue, but Aints spoke with the conviction that he now knew that wasn't the case. He had felt it when he tried casting the spell. "Why, you mean yes, Albedo. There's only one thing it could be: a world item. There were 200 of them in Yggdrasil. These items were far stronger than even guild weapons and god items. Yes, for a world item, it would probably be simple to put an undead, who should have been immune to psychic effects, under mind control." Then Aints remembered the other guardians who were outside Nazareth. It was possible they were also being targeted. Kicking himself for not thinking of it sooner, he said, "Albedo, have all the guardians in the field return. When they get back, we need to check if they are under any mind control like Sholtia. To the throne room immediately. After that, the treasury." Chapter 4, Before the Death Match 1. What Aints saw upon teleporting to the treasury was like the collected twinkle of every star in the sky. The ceiling above was so high, and the walls so long, it was hard to fit a whole one in one's field of vision. The room was gigantic, and it was chock full of treasure that dazzled the eyes. Gold coins and jewels were piled up in the center, forming a mountain range. There were so many it was impossible to count them all. Partially buried in the mountains were super first-class artisanal items. At just a glance, one noticed a golden mug, a scepter inlaid with various types of jewels, a beast's pelt that sparkled silver, an elaborate tapestry that made free use of gold thread, a gleaming pearly horn, a fan made of feathers the colors of the rainbow, a crystal pitcher, an absolutely exquisite ring that was emitting a faint glow, and a mask made with some kind of animal skin inlaid with black and white precious stones. There was more, of course. There were probably 200 or 300 similar works of art buried in the mountains of gold coins. Aints heard two of those who come with him gasp at the sight of these literal mountains of treasure. 66%. Aints looked back at the three women attending him. Albedo had changed out of her armor and wore a white dress. She looked around with her admiration plain on her beautiful face. Yuri Alpha, who'd given him his ring when he returned to Nazareth, was the same. The one who hadn't gasped in wonder was quietly looking back at Aints. Her face was so well formed it looked artificial. Only one of her emerald eyes, glinting coldly like a jewel, was visible. The other was covered with an eye patch. Her strawberry blonde hair, grown out long, glittered in the light coming from the ceiling. She was an automaton, a type of grotesque. Her name was CZ2128 Delta, but she was called Shizu for short. A member of the Pleiades, she wore a maid uniform similar to Nabral's and Uri's, but her urban camouflage accessories and the cute sticker on her skirt that said 1 yen in kanji set hers apart. This excerpt from Overlord paints a vivid picture of Ainz Ulgaon's wealth and the meticulousness of his retainer, Yuri. Here's a breakdown of the key elements and what they reveal. Key observations: Ainz's immense wealth, the sheer quantity and quality of the treasures are staggering. It's not just gold, but a diverse collection of magical items, beautifully crafted objects, and items adorned with incredibly valuable gemstones. The list goes on and on, showcasing a truly opulent collection. The fact that Yuri initially thought it wasn't worth very much highlights just how much Ainz has. Yuri's efficiency, attention to detail. Yuri is a practical and organized retainer. She immediately notices what she perceives as disorganization, items buried in gold coins, and is eager to begin sorting and storing everything. Her quick apology after re-evaluating the situation shows her humility and respect for Ainz. Shizu's quiet observance. Shizu is a contrast to Yuri's verbal acknowledgement. She simply nods, suggesting a more reserved personality. She's a member of the Gunner class, added in the Fall of Valkyrie update, which shows the world is still adapting to new additions. World building. The Fall of Valkyrie. The mention of the Fall of Valkyrie suggests a large-scale update or event in the game-turned-reality world. It shows the world is evolving, and new classes and technologies are being incorporated. Unique items, imagery. The descriptions are rich and evocative. Items like the lilies made out of a material like rainbow-colored glass and the belt with imperial topazes sewn into it aren't just valuable, they are beautiful and give a sense of the magical artistry present in this world. Ainz's status. The scene reinforces Ainz's status as an incredibly powerful and wealthy being. He can afford a vast collection of treasures, and his retainers are dedicated to managing it all. Character dynamics. Ainz, as the relaxed ruler, Ainz doesn't seem bothered by the apparent clutter. He allows Yuri to initially criticize his arrangement, showing he's confident in his choices and doesn't need constant affirmation. Yuri, as the efficient manager, she represents the practical side of Ainz's court, ensuring everything runs smoothly. Shizu, as the silent support, she's a capable warrior, but her quiet demeanor suggests a different role within the group. In essence, this excerpt is a great example of how the author uses setting and character interaction to build a rich and engaging world, and to further establish the power and personality of Ainz Ulgaon. Once they were airborne, it became apparent the air was faintly tinged a dangerous, toxic purple color. Yuri glanced around looking for the source of the coloration. She didn't see anything on the ceiling or walls that was giving off a purple light. A look of mild confusion crossed her beautiful face. A level voice addressed her. Yuri, the air is contaminated with a deadly magical poison. Huh? Her puzzled look was met with a cold stare. It was Shizu's empty green gaze. More precisely, her eyes were blank. Extremely shapely though her face was, it gave the impression of a mask. As an automaton, Shizu was built that way to not display her emotions. Blood of J.R. Amunganda. At Shizu's mention of the most effective deadly poison, Ainz replied, "Yeah, you got it. I didn't tell you guys, but the air around the treasury is polluted. If you didn't have an item or ability that made you immune to poison, you'd die in 3 seconds. Is that why you chose us to accompany you?" Yes, it was. Yuri, the Dullahan, quickly pushed up her glasses, and Shizu, the automaton with the frozen face. Both were grotesques who possessed an immunity ability as a racial characteristic. Poison would work on Albedo as a demon, but she had other means of protection. Yes, that's why I brought you. But the reason I brought Shizu isn't just that. I wanted to check something. Ainz and the others arrived at the door across the room without needing to scale the Golden Mountains. But could it really be described as a door? Something like a door-shaped, bottomless pit of darkness was stuck flat on the wall. Ainz stood pondering before it as if it were a painting. This is the weapon storeroom. What was the password, Lord Ainz? If this is the weapon storeroom, does that mean there are other treasures stored elsewhere? Albedo doesn't know about the inside of the treasury. Ainz cocked his head in response to Albedo's question. But it did make sense. The treasury was cut off from the great tomb of Nazarick. It was made so that it was nearly impossible to reach without teleporting, using a ring of Ainz Ulgaon. Albedo hadn't had a ring until 10 days ago, so it wasn't terribly surprising that she didn't know much. It was hard to know how much knowledge the NPCs had. Aints replied after briefly considering this. Yes, it does. My friend Genjiro liked to keep things tidy. Everything should be organized according to its purpose. He the one who created our teammate Entoma, right? Yes, that's right, Yuri, but maybe like to keep things tidy isn't he quite right. If that was the case, he probably would have organized those mountains of gold coins, and he probably wouldn't he have called his room the Chamber of Filth. To get back to the point, though everything should be organized into categories like armor, weapons, accessories, other items, consumables, crafting materials, etc. There's also a room dedicated to the upkeep of Nazarick. Oh, and there's one where all the data crystals are stored. Sure enough, as they looked along the wall in the direction Aints had chattily pointed, there were more of the 2D black things. Actually, they all connect in the back chamber, so it doesn't matter which one you enter. Oh, I guess I am talking too much. Not at all. We thank you for willingly answering the question. The two combat maids bowed in tandem with Albedo's words. What am I doing? We don't have time for this. Once I start bragging about Nazarick, I end up blabbing on forever. Shrugging, Aints faced the darkness. This was a type of door that opened with a password. There were ways to force them open with magic or thief abilities, but Aints didn't have that spell or skill, so he had to say the password, but yup, he forgot it. Of course he had. There were quite a few tricks like this inside Nazarick. He remembered the ones for places he went to often, but even if he came to the treasury, he almost never had occasion to come to this room. There was no way he would remember the password to this door. About the only time he came to the treasury was to pay Nazarick's upkeep costs with money he earned. He hadn't been this far in a few years. He couldn't draw the answer out of his deepest memories, so Aints recited the password that worked on almost everything. Glory to Aints Ulgaun. In response to the password, writing appeared on the pitch-black door. It looked as if it was floating up to the surface of a lake. The writing said ascended a terra in coelum itrumque, descended in terram et recipit vim superiorum et inferiorum. Crap, Tabula was always so into it he hadn't meant to say it aloud, and Albedo reacted slightly. Aints thought of one of the people who had been in charge of coming up with gimmicks. 20% of the minute tricks in the Great Tomb of Nazarick were his work. His extremely detailed designs somehow ran through the guild's sizable, customizable data budget. That made the other members complain that they couldn't design freely, so he took responsibility. He bought a cash item to increase the amount of data they could use. Aints looked earnestly at the writing on the door. No doubt it was a hint, but what did it mean? He took more time searching his memory for the answer. Finally, he remembered the password. Pretty sure it was, thus, you will possess the light of the whole world, and all obscurity will fly away from you, right? Aints glanced at Shizu for confirmation. She nodded. Shizu was an NPC made not by Tabula Smaragdina, but by one of the other guild members who created interesting features. Her settings meant she was familiar with how to get past all of them. She would have known the solution to the hint, too. The only reason Aints hadn't asked her to answer was because he selfishly wanted to solve it himself. The Great Tomb of Nazarick had come to life when he arrived in this world. He wanted to be the first to leave footprints on its lands, like on newly fallen snow. As if reading his mind, the darkness began to be sucked up into a single point. The darkness vanished almost immediately, leaving behind a black sphere about the size of a fist hanging in the air. Now that the darkness had been acting as a lid, they could see into the room through a hole. Inside was a well-ordered world, unlike anything they'd seen so far. It was like a museum gallery. The room had somewhat reduced lighting and stretched far back. The ceiling was high, perhaps 16 feet. This height suggested beings besides humans would enter. The room was 32 feet across. The floor was lustrous black stone laid down with no gaps. It was as if it were one big slab. The way it reflected the faint light from the ceiling gave the place a quiet, solemn atmosphere. Beautiful weapons lined both sides of the room. They were not only organized, but also magnificently displayed. Let us go. Aints didn't wait for the three attending him to respond before stepping into the weapons storeroom. Awaiting them were broadswords, great swords, estocks, flambages, scimitars, parters, shotels, kukris, claymores, and short swords. There were also sword breakers. It wasn't just swords, though. There were one-handed axes, two-handed axes, one-handed battering weapons, one-handed spears, bows, and crossbows. Even with broad classification, there were too many to list. Besides that, there were countless weapons so gaudily ornamented it was unclear whether they should still be called weapons. They focused on appearance only and were often impossible to sheath. Actually, there might have been more of those than actual weapons. Most of them were not made of common materials like iron. There was one with a blade of blue crystal, one with a pure white blade and gold designs, one with a black blade that had purple runes engraved on it, and a bow that looked like its string was made of light. Then there were some where one glance was enough to tell they were dangerous, a two-handed axe with a blade that oozed fresh blood, a gigantic mace that had pained expressions appearing and disappearing in the black metal part, and a spear that was made by linking up things that appeared to be human hands. These, too, were impossible to count. Aints could guess that most of them were magic, but he didn't know what they all did.